Well, for more on this, we're joined by the political analyst Nikola Mikovic, live from Belgrade, Serbia. Thank you so much for joining us today, sir. What message is Russia sending with these latest ballistic missile strikes all across Ukraine?
The war has been going on for nearly 4.5 years, which means that such attacks have become a daily routine. Now, that does not necessarily mean that Russia strikes Kiev on a daily basis. It does from time to time, but it strikes Ukrainian territory and Ukrainian cities daily, which is why I think this particular missile strike does not have any specific message. It's just part of Russian military strategy. Although I have to point out that in the past, Russia wasted its ballistic missiles on completely insignificant facilities such as garages, green markets, uh, abandoned barracks, empty buildings, and so on. Over the past few weeks, it improved its efficiency, which means that it focused on facilities that do have significant importance for the Ukrainian military. For instance, it strikes the ports of Odessa and Mykolaiv, or Nikolaev, however you want to call it. However, there are no reports suggesting that those ports were completely destroyed, which again raises the questions of how efficient those strikes are. But again, there are reports suggesting that Russia has improved its efficiency. Ukraine, for its part, in the past started pretty much the same campaign, aiming to completely cut off or strategically isolate Crimea and parts of southeastern Ukraine that are under Russian control. But then for some reason, it completely stopped its campaign and focused on other targets. Right now, it's striking the Russian wildberries storages all over the country, but not energy infrastructure and not Crimea and southeastern Ukraine, which again raises questions on why Russia and Ukraine have such campaigns and then suddenly stop doing that and focus on something completely different, and that's something that could be significant, but it also could be insignificant. It all depends on the context. But in any case, I expect Russia to continue its campaign and to continue striking Kiev and other cities in Ukraine.
And so President Zelensky says Trump has agreed to provide Patriot missile licenses. How significant could this be for Ukraine's air defense?
In the long term, it could help Ukraine, although not 100%. Under the current circumstances in the era of FPV drones, there is no 100% protection. Doesn't matter what kind of air defense systems you have. And the war in the Middle East has clearly demonstrated that you can have perfect air defense capabilities, but some ballistic missiles will simply go through and they will create certain damage, and drones will also have significant impact. What's important here is the very fact that the United States agreed to help Ukraine produce Patriot missiles on Ukrainian territory. Now, Ukraine is fighting a war. How is it possible that Ukraine will begin producing those weapons? Russia, I'm absolutely sure, has intelligence information about that, and it could strike a potential building site. Now, whether it will do that or not is a separate question. In the past, Russia allowed Western countries to outsource military production to Ukraine and to build drone plants. Whether it will do the same when it comes to Patriot missiles remains to be seen. I believe it will, because the Kremlin at this point does not seem willing to raise the stakes and to strike American facilities, which means that in the future, Ukraine will have more chances to protect its sky and its territory. However, again, as I emphasized, there is no 100% protection against ballistic missiles and drones. But this move will certainly help Kiev to a significant extent.
And do you expect Russia to intensify its attacks on Ukraine if it receives these Patriot systems?
Yes, if it receives, Russia will then intensify its campaign because it will have less chances to create serious damage in Ukraine. That's the Kremlin's modus operandi. And you probably noticed that Russia's moves are very strange from a military perspective, because when it had a chance to do something, it didn't do that. It waited for a long time, and then it took steps that proved to be too little and too late. For instance, if it aimed to announce a partial mobilization, the right time was uh, in the spring of 2022, but the Kremlin waited and it was announced only in the autumn of 2022, which was too late. So, yes, I'm sure if Ukraine starts producing Patriot missile systems, and if it has more chances to protect itself, then Russia will start striking Ukraine using more ballistic missiles, wasting them because Ukraine will down many of them. And then the Kremlin will have a hard time adapting. But that's what it's been doing all the time. It's constantly adapting to Ukraine's actions. It is Ukraine that has the initiative at this point, especially when it comes to drone warfare.
And how could these latest civilian casualties affect the diplomatic efforts to end the war?
Unfortunately, civilian casualties rarely play an important role in any conflicts. They are widely seen by policymakers as a collateral damage. I cannot imagine Putin or Zelensky or the Trump administration um, ending the conflict just because some civilians died. That's how things don't work, unfortunately. So, what Ukraine and Russia should worry about is the fact that both nations face a serious manpower issue. If this war lasts for a few more years, it's entirely possible that they will not have enough manpower to continue fighting. And what also should worry them is that the fact that as a result of this conflict, significant uh, portions of their territories will be effectively depopulated, especially the Donbass and the parts of southeastern Ukraine. Doesn't matter who wins the war, that territory will belong to Russia or to Ukraine. We don't know that at this point. But at this point, it's quite clear that it will be quite empty because the population already left. And I don't think they're willing to get back there because um, this is not realistic. They moved to Moscow or Kiev or whatever to the west, and I don't expect them to return to places such as Avdiivka or Pokrovsk or so on. Which means that if the authorities in Moscow and Kiev aim to revive those regions, they will have to bring migrants to those regions, which will have an impact on the demographic structure of Ukraine and Russia. So that will be one of the consequences of this war, the consequences of Vladimir Putin's decision to launch the invasion of Ukraine in 2022.
And so, looking ahead, do you see the conflict entering a more dangerous phase, or is there still room for negotiations?
Yes, I do. And I'm afraid there is no much room for negotiations, although I'm absolutely sure that the United States will continue sending its envoys to Moscow and Kiev, aiming to, if not end, then at least freeze the conflict, which I don't think will happen because um, there is no um, room for that at this point. Russia did not achieve any of its goals in Ukraine, and Ukraine, on the other hand, aims to recapture all the territory that's currently under Russian control, which at this point does not seem very realistic. As a result, the war will go on because neither side is willing to freeze the conflict under the current circumstances. They still do have the capacity to fight and they will continue fighting. It is possible that they will eventually reach a Minsk style agreement, which means that they will freeze the conflict, but there will still be sporadic firing or maybe drone strikes. Um, and that could last for years, as the Minsk era lasted for 8 years, and after that Russia invaded Ukraine. So it's entirely possible that if eventually they freeze the conflict, it will only serve as a preparation for another round of hostilities. But to sign a peace deal and to end this war, I'm afraid it's necessary for one of the two involved parties to effectively surrender. And I'm afraid we're still far from such an outcome.
So thank you so much for your time today. Appreciate it, Lars.